Sveiki visi. O, šitas puikiai veikia. Jo, tai aš čia liksiu. Angliškai. Sorry. I was just told that we're going to speak in English because of some guests. So great to see you all here. And yeah, it's really awesome that you're sometimes asking me to come and share the experience. I didn't really prepare any specific topic, but thought that you may have some various questions about fundraising, funding. As I understand, this session is about investments and funding different stages. So what I would like to propose, just raise your hand, suggest a topic, anything hopefully fitting the funding area. And I'll write a few questions and we just start and let's see how it goes. So it's already first. Great.
You suggested to pick a topic, so I saw the interesting thing is the meeting communication skills over the meetings with the investors. Like sometimes you have 30 minutes, so how to share the time with the teammates, what to say, like what's your elevation, like all these things, like how to get the best of the meetings, because I have a chance to go to a lot of meetings and then sometimes I will go after and think I probably did something wrong, or like I should talk less, or like this is something. What would be your advices over these meetings? How to get the best?
Right, and just to clarify, are you talking to one-on-one meetings with investors, or is more like general pitching?
Usually I talk 1-on-4, so like half-hour meeting with 4 investors, and
okay.
that's
okay. Oh, cool. So talking.
So the next one.
Talking to investors. Sure.
There is a general belief that investors invest in a team rather than in a product. So what does it imply? The solo founder versus co-founders, and also experience background of the entrepreneur. So let's say if it's a student or a graduate, he might not have a solid experience. So what are you looking for?
Okay, that's an awesome question, by the way. Okay. Sorry. Why I'm in Lithuania all the time? Oh, you? Okay. Well, because I just like it here. I think it's a great place. So.
Okay. My question would be this: during the first part of this session, there was a discussion what benefit might come from the investor, and there was a quite big focus on the money aspect, and at the same time the outcome was that, well, you hardly can expect some additional other benefit from the investor. So I would like to ask you, in your opinion, how much boost for the business the startup might expect from the investor, besides the aspect of the money, this expertise? Right. Thank you.
Okay, that's an awesome question as well. It seems like very, very professional questions, which I'm totally happy about.
Hello. As we know our product, as we know the customers that probably will buy it or not, just we have the profile of the customer. Is there some like profile of investor? Like who are they? Who are those people who can invest?
Right. Okay, well, I think we have a great starting point. So I'm definitely looking at all of you. So at any given time, if you have any additional question or want to ask or to clarify things, just feel free to raise your hand, and I will go deeper, because again, some of you are a little bit more experienced, some of you are less. I'll just try to keep the average, and because no wrong questions or no low clarifications. So if you allow me, I will probably start with the awesome question about product versus team. I think it's a really great thing to discuss, because very often you will meet investors who say we don't really care about the product, we definitely care about the team, because we believe that if a team is great, then the product doesn't really matter. So I'll just explain a little bit, elaborate. So first of all, you actually have to start very deep with the startup entrepreneurship / investor philosophy in general, that any new venture is by definition is a very high risk. So if you're curious, venture capitalists use the formula where out of a portfolio of 10 companies, they upfront know that 5 will just fail to 0. So they upfront know that investing any money essentially will end up in 0 in half of the cases. So in another 4 of the cases, they will make less than what they made invested. It's just pure statistics. And in 1 out of 10, they call it a champion investment, they will make much more than 10x. So that essentially pays for the whole party. So that's very, very simplistic investor formula. So investors definitely hedge their risks across different companies, but for entrepreneurs, sometimes it's very difficult to understand, how come my project may fail. So typically the expectation of the success is very different from an investor versus the entrepreneur. So entrepreneurs, just because it's their idea, and they tend to believe that their idea cannot fail, they tend to focus too much sometimes on that specific project, that specific idea, therefore to emphasize the value of the idea or the importance of the idea or importance of the project way more than anything else. Now, in reality, the investor knows, differently from an entrepreneur, because investor apparently sees hundreds of those cases, that whatever entrepreneur is, whatever he believes, it doesn't really matter, because there's pure statistics. So in that case, he actually thinks only on the quality of implementing the idea. That's the one that really does matter for the investor, because apparently if you come to me and say, hey, I want to build a spaceship to start digging gold on Mars, if you're like a solid physic, if a lot of scientific work, a big lab, I may believe you. Now, if you're a student, it's highly unlikely that I invest my money in that project. So in that perspective, I really look at you and say, okay, what's the probability that given everything else, given that a lot of our teams, again, regardless of what you think, because you may think that your idea one of a kind and nobody else is trying to implement that idea, reality is every single product, every single company, every single idea at the same time is being implemented by probably dozens of teams around the globe. So to an investor, it's not unique. It's, you could invest in that team or you could invest in another team. And he knows that there is only purely probability, and the only thing you can do is to maximize the likelihood through people. Because apparently if you're experienced, if you're skilled, if you don't do the mistakes that some other people do, then you are just a little bit more likely to increase your chances. So that's why they know that typically you would, most likely you will fail anyway. They don't expect you to succeed. No, it's just pure reality. They think that, yes, there might be 10% chance that you will return 10x the investment, and that's why they are talking to you. And again, the only thing in that equation which is within investors' control is, again, assessing you personally, the team, and just deciding for themselves, how likely you are to implement that idea slightly better than the next team. So apparently, this is where your appearance, your enthusiasm, your drive, your energy, your skills, your professionalism, etc., comes into play. And if you can prove to investor, apparently you cannot prove that the idea will work. I mean, you cannot do anything to prove that. But what you could do is say, yes, it's unclear whether this idea or product will work, but at least I will prove you that if in general you are trying to invest in that idea, then I'm your best bet. It's just excuse me for a frivolous metaphor, but it's like betting on horses. If you can prove that you're like a front runner, then you're highly likely to get a lot of bets on you, as opposed to somebody else. Although again, nobody guarantees that even the most likely horse will win the race. But that slightly explains the dynamics why that part is much more important to investor than the product itself or your idea, etc., etc. And it's totally the opposite for the entrepreneur, because totally the opposite you believe. It's like your baby, your child, you cannot fail. So look at what I've done. And investor says, no, it doesn't really matter. Let's look, who are you? And that's the beginning of the story. And then everything else, apparently, the way you look, the way you talk, etc., is very important. Now, having said that, those who actually get eventually that idea that it's the team or the entrepreneur who is the most important part in the whole equation, they sometimes get it wrong, like what are specific things are really important versus what is they think is less important. So apparently the common understanding is, my profession, my skill, my experience, my ability to manage, etc., is important because that's intuitive. If you tell, hey, I was 20 years head of Intel division there and there, that is my most important feature, and this is why you should invest in me. Now, if you talk to the investor and ask, what are the top 3 things that you are looking in the team or entrepreneur, you will be highly surprised. If you ask me, I would put number one by far is just the energy, the enthusiasm, the motivation. That's, to me, is number one, because what we investors are asking entrepreneurs is to take an extremely high risk. Because, again, the probability of a success is 90%, like whatever you do, whatever you think you do. And apparently we expect, like entrepreneur, to put a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of energy, much more work than typically you would put into, say, a hard position. And the investors, unlike entrepreneurs, are not willing to take that risk themselves. They would prefer, once every 3 months a board meeting and yell you if the numbers are wrong and, say good things to you if the numbers are right, but that's about it. They prefer using somebody else's money, buy your energy, and then take a cut if you are successful. That's pretty much the formula for investors. So the energy, the enthusiasm, your own belief, even though they may not share that, they say, well, he's naive, he thinks, it's like 50% of winning. In reality, it's, much less, but let him think that. Because as long as he thinks that, he believes that, he's very useful to the business. He will put much more effort, much more into the business than anybody else could. And that's the most important thing. So if you're really driven, there's, everything else is mechanics, because you can definitely learn how to do product, you can learn how to build team, you can learn how to manage, etc., etc. But unless you have a genuine desire to do so, nothing else matters. And that's why if you really talk to like big corporations and ask them what's the main reason why, how big corporations like Microsoft, etc., explain why they are not driving all innovation the same way as Instagrams and Facebooks and everybody else does, they say, what, we just don't see the people being driven enough to actually want to do anything. So, if you're like a VP at some big corporation, like, who cares if you build a product or a service, your salary doesn't really change much, you don't really feel, bigger achievement, etc. So that matters. So that's definitely number one. Sometimes absence of experience is a good thing. Because apparently a very true statement about, say, inexperienced people is that because of being inexperienced, they don't do the things usual way. And that means apparently, of course, there's a probability they will fail because they never done management or product planning or product itself, never ever. But the great thing is there is a chance that by doing wrong, from the classical perspective, they actually might find a new way, just like Columbus found the America without expecting that. So maybe the different approach, different mentality, different thinking, even like against the traditional classical understanding of what was wrong. That's exactly what what will bring the entrepreneur and the company to succeed. So what I'm basically trying to communicate is, yes, the team is extremely important. Yes, it's also wrong to think that without 5 years or 10 years of experience, nobody will take me seriously. If I'm a student or just have a couple of years of experience, totally wrong. That's not the top priority. That's not the the most important thing. And then again, if you really, really, really believe in your product, are ready to spend a couple of years, sleepless nights, 100 hours in the office, etc., that's the most valuable thing. And again, luckily, being young, sometimes you're naive enough to invest that kind of effort. With that kind of risk/reward ratio, and that's exactly what the investor is buying. He's buying unproportional effort that you are going to put just because you believe. So that's why team is so important. And that probably leads to the second question, which was raised here. How do you talk to investor? Again, I would probably say that it's probably. I've heard a lot of opinions that, you have to prepare like 30-second elevator pitch, you have to be able to communicate it well, you have to prepare like, highlight points, etc. What I would say is, think of that. Very often, investor is a professional. Like rarely investors invest into, first time in their life. Typically, it's a professional investor that you will talk to VCs and angels and private capital, etc. So they've been doing that for a while. So they can tell a great company idea from so-so company idea pretty soon. He's making a pretty responsible decision. So sometimes committing, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's pretty big responsibility. Now, if you believe that he's going to make a decision based on your appearance, like I'm wearing like red socks and, sure, like go get like $100 million, that does not work that way. The investors, good investors, definitely see beyond you know, your pitch, your voice, your presentation, your appearance, your inexperience, etc., etc. They are trained that way to look at the essence. It's just, you know, if you talk to a musician, a professional musician, and they will be qualified enough to tell, you know, based on your voice, based on your, you know, like listening to music and you know, beyond, you know, your appearance. So my message is very simple, and it doesn't really matter how you dress, how you talk, how you elevate your voice, or how you look in the people's eyes. It helps. I mean, just general human skill, and it's nice to appear well, to talk well, to be understood, but that's not the most important thing. So what I would say, if you're pitching to, say, 20 investors and getting back the response that, you know, sorry, but not now, most likely it's the idea and the product or the skill or something else. Less likely it's the presentation. So it doesn't really matter. You know, professional investors can definitely be able to ask the right questions and look, you know, beyond just the appearance of the pitch. Again, having said that, you know, there are life hacks. So sometimes you definitely, you know, are much more beneficial of being able to squeeze all your product ideas into 3 sentences and send a simple email saying we're doing 1, 2, 3, as opposed to, you know, 10 pages. Simply because if you send 10 pages of text, and that's, by the way, very often the case here in Lithuania. So the dominant opinion is maybe taught by universities, and unless you put together 150 pages business plan with, you know, as dense text as possible, with as few diagrams, as few spacing, etc., that increases your chances. And like, reality is you won't even have to have a chance at all. Because, you know, put yourself in the investor's shoes, and suppose you're getting like 10 emails per day, and one email is like 3 bullet points. We do ABC, and there is like 150 pages of dense text, which takes an effort to understand and probably will require like an hour to read. I know your intuitive reaction as investor, fine, you know, I want to look at both, but I flag that one, the long one, as read later, and I skim those 3 bullet points immediately. Now, if we meet my basic criteria, like, you know, in the space that I'm looking, et cetera, I may want to ask additional questions, but that read later never comes. That's it, just life reality. So I'm just trying to illustrate that, yes, it's helpful to be able to squeeze, to be able to communicate well, but that's not the main point. The main point is actually who you are, what are you working on. So it does also lead a little bit into also a great question, what are the types of investors? Because, well, apparently investing world is really wide, and if you look at the global scale, you know, you'll find anybody from bankers to, you know, private capital to hedge funds to venture capital, angels, etc. So if you look at the very narrow segment of what's relevant to entrepreneurs and startups, I would highlight probably 2 classes. So angels and venture capital. So there are a lot of also like seed camps, etc., who do the angel function. So just the main difference between those two, angels are typical individuals. So typically they are successful entrepreneurs who are either tired or smart enough not to build another company, rather to invest. So typically invest own money, and typically it's like less amount of money that you can expect from a venture capital firm. So I would say Lithuania is, say, 50 to 150,000 euro. That would be the average angel check. Say Silicon Valley might be up to, say, $200,000, $500,000. But typically, again, you talk to one individual and you get a smaller check. But the good thing is, at the beginning of your career, the advice, the active participation of that individual, the angel, is much more valuable to you than the money. Because apparently, you know, I would say that, you know, if Larry Page or Sergey or somebody else of those scale ask you, say, I want to co-invest, and I'm willing to write like a, you know, $500,000 check, I would kind of dare to guess that their value, their connections, their experience, you know, their ability to tell you what to do, what not to do is way more valuable than the money. So this is what you typically, like a package, what you get from an angel investor. You know, active participation, typically they're active. That means, you know, you can expect maybe a day, a month of pretty active participation. You can expect added value in terms of, you know, connections, product planning, sometimes product ideas, sometimes, you know, actually getting hands down and doing what's missing, what's necessary, like writing press releases or renting an office or something else. And plus you get a small check. So that's a, I would say, pretty valuable package. Now, on the other part of the scale is typically venture capital, and then again here there are a lot of dimensions where you can, on which you can say differentiate with VC firms. I would mention probably the most important is stage. So this is something that investors, like the first question of entrepreneur to investor, hey, you know, what kind of checks are you writing? Because ironically, it's much easier to get 10 million than 1 million, and getting 200,000 is almost impossible. Almost impossible. So investors even have this term called the Death Valley. Death Valley means getting funded anywhere between, say, 200,000 and 1 million, because nobody wants to pay that kind of money. Because if you're an investor, essentially funding is the same effort if you invest 10 million or you invest 1 million, right? Apparently, to justify the valuation for 10 million, the company has to be bigger, mature, have revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So ROI on my investor's time is way higher if I invest 10 million than I do 1. It's just pure math. Same effort, 10 times larger result. That's why, you know, for example, casinos, they want you to play as large bets as possible. And if you go to Vegas and if you go at the you know, popular hour, they would say minimum, say, hey, no less than 25 bucks. Because otherwise, you know, I don't want to deal pennies or cents or dollars, because I can play big game. And that's why investors generally prefer to write as large checks as possible. Because again, their business, they get like, you know, like 100 million or $1 billion from a big fund, like pension fund or private capital or somewhere else. They want to write 10 checks, 10 million each, you know, spend time with 10 companies, but do not deal with, you know, 100 companies or so, with smaller checks, and definitely never write, you know, 100,000 or so checks, because they have to write like 1,000 checks. That means, you know, looking after 1,000 companies, which is just physically impossible. So that's why, but, you know, apparently, smaller funds generally have smaller investments. So if you look at European funds, which are typically between, say, 10 and a couple hundred million euro, then they would actually say that, okay, we're early stage. That means, translating into common language, that means we're writing checks between, say, 200,000 and say up to 1 million. Because apparently, if you only have 10 million to invest, you will never invest all 10 million in one deal. I mean, this is too risky. At least you have to have 10 deals in the portfolio. On the other hand, the more west you go, especially Silicon Valley, we are managing billions of dollars, and sometimes we say the smallest check we write is $1 million, just no conversation in anything below that. Average check would be 10, and sometimes we write like up to 100 or 200 million. So asking for a stage, like, you know, what kind of checks you are writing is the first qualification question, because if you are raising or realistically counting on getting only a couple 100,000, then just no way anything can work between you and a later stage investor, because it's just they don't do those deals. So you can spend, you know, a month just trying to see the partners, trying to get the appointments, you know, sending presentations, and you might end up getting disappointed and say, hey, no, you know, those big guys like Accel or Sequoia or Index did not invest in me. My idea is wrong. I'm wrong entrepreneur. You know, let's go do something else. No. It's just because it's a mismatch. And the second dimension, apparently, which is very useful to check before you even talk, is the industry sector. Because again, just to give you a little insight, you know, how the investments are done, it's very wrong to believe that investor is just waiting for like whatever ideas come. Say, here is a new social network, here is a new solar energy panel, here is a new drug, and they're deciding, you know, good, bad, you know, invest, not invest. Wrong. You have to understand that investors first, is they identify the vertical. So, for example, 3D printing is hot, mind reading is hot, applications is hot. They identify the vertical, which is on the rise. Second is, if it's a good venture capital firm, they identify the people or the partners who are able to help them in identifying and leading and working with the companies within that vertical. So for example, when Accel were doing mobile investments, they hired a couple of guys out of OpenWave and Mobile Telecom and Nokia to make sure that they, in that fund, have enough expertise and experience to look at the specifically mobile sector. So then they say, okay, mobile is hot. You know, I have a couple of guys that, you know, are skilled in mobile. Let's see and let's try build theses, and they literally call it the thesis. You know, what kind of business models may emerge on that market? Now, apparently, for example, you look, I'm just illustrating. If there's 3D printing and 3D printers are humming at home, it's pretty easy to see, kind of in a marketplace or mall built into your printer that, suggests you, hey, you can print with jewelry or with toys or with cups or something else. So there has to be a marketplace. And they build that thesis. Printers will come. We predict that there will be 10 million printers in homes, that we will have touch screens, and that every touch screen will have a marketplace, and that will be a business which will be generating X million a year, and therefore valuable $1 billion. That's called the thesis. And now the next thing they do is they say, okay, let's now look who in the community of startups is most close to my thesis. So they would say, hey, this company is doing, like CG Trader is doing 3D models, great. Toysy is doing toys, great. Somebody else is doing something else, great. So you identify companies that are as close to your thesis as possible, and then you look at the team. So who do you believe is most likely to win? This, or this? And let's say, okay, so I believe that that team is most likely to execute best on that thesis, so I go invest. So in that perspective, again, if you pitch anything which is not compliant with your thesis, you will just get nowhere. So luckily, again, on every single internet site, typically a venture capital firm will publish what verticals they are in. So typically you will find, we're active in solar energy, we're active in biotech, we're active there and there. You can get a hint of, what verticals we are busy by checking the portfolio, because every single VC publishes publicly the portfolio. And you can probably estimate that, if a portfolio consists of mobile advertising, mobile apps, something else, it's highly likely that, that specific firm is investing in mobile. So it's a relevant area and you can pitch there. And equally, if you already have made a bet, so if you already invested in like 3D printing marketplace, etc., it's pointless to pitch because they already have made an investment and simply conflict of interest will not allow them to invest in something else in the same domain. Now, the bad news is that generally VCs never say no. It will be a terribly bad VC who says no, because for them, for VCs or for any investor, the matrix basically. If I say no, it's highly likely that you never will come to me again. It's possible that even though I said no, you have succeeded with your business in the next 3 months. And in 4 months, I look at your success and I want to say yes, but because I said no, that you no longer talk to me. So to me as an investor, even though it's no, a typical approach would be saying, not now, but it's awesome, interesting. They will never say, your idea is wrong. They will typically say, it's great, it's interesting, but not just now. Let's see what happens and look at 3 months later. So it's very difficult to get that feedback straight. It's very difficult. I would say 80% of the responses would be like a polite yes, where in reality they should mean like no. So it's very difficult to read. But again, if you look at the stage, if you look at the verticals, if you clearly openly ask that question, say, hey, are you investing in 3D printing? No. Are you planning to invest in 3D printing? Unlikely because we don't have anybody. That's it. You don't need to spend months and years, whatever, trying to pitch that company. It's a no. It's a very fast learning. And you look at the website, and apparently you check that there are like a couple of companies in that space, and you say, hey, I've observed that you made a couple of investments in the mind reading space, and I just happen to have a unique technology which I believe is interesting for you. You're much, I would say, like 20 times, 30 times more likely to get a response. So again, just summarizing, I would split investors into angels and venture capital. Typically early stage, it's much easier to find and much easier to work and much more better actually to work with an angel as opposed to VC. Plus, again, for a small check, you're unlikely to get VC funding. Even in Lithuania, VCs generally would start talking to you, let's say, 200,000 euro range. So before that, for a small idea, small company, where you only want to start, sometimes even that is too large. But individuals, fine. Again, venture capital is definitely out there. Again, if you're curious, I would say that, say, US venture capital, if you have any chance to talk to them, it's typically much more open, much more fast, and have much higher valuations in general, but that's you to decide. And I would say qualify them immediately as soon as I can read the website or talk to a person is stage and vertical, like industry sector. If both is yes, then I would spend time writing emails, meeting, pitching, etc. If the answer is no for any, just don't bother. It is pretty much a waste of time. So added value, right? I already touched a little bit about what kind of added value you get from angels. So there are, again, good news and bad news. The good news is that in general, I honestly believe both angels and VCs add a lot of added value, not monetary value. Because unlike you, or like an just entrepreneur, they spend time, they watch companies daily, and they have experience in what's working, what's not. So there is no need very often to invent a bike and just take what's available. So if you build a new product, idea, company, you will highly likely to get a very relevant, very professional advice on a lot of areas, from PR to how you build a team, to how to manage a company, what to do, what not to do, what marketing channels you might try for that kind of product, etc., etc. And sometimes it's just one advice can save you like 3 years of just blind research. So that's one area. Hiring, especially management team and high-level executive, is apparently extremely helpful there. And I have to again step back a little bit and just tell you a couple data points. One is I do often see that young companies, small companies, don't have the ambitions to hire like super high professionals. So if you're a startup, like 10 guys in Lithuania, probably you're not thinking of hiring a vice president of sales for Facebook. Probably it's like not even within your like consideration at all, because it's counterintuitive. Like vice presidents of Facebook do not generally go into 10 people teams in Lithuania. And that's wrong. That's wrong because, again, I will not go into details. You can do that research yourself. For the sake of time, I will just tell that a typical Silicon Valley approach is founding the company, getting funded, and the next step after getting funding is attracting the best people you can get, and typically that would be a 10 years plus experience in a company like Yahoo or Facebook, etc., at the director or VP level. So that's a very common, say, next step after getting funding. I would just wildly guess that, say, 80 to 90% of Silicon Valley startups, this is exactly what they do with the first money from Series A funding. So now if you put yourself into the shoes of, let's say, vice president of Yahoo who might be looking to join a startup, again, there are financial reasons, and there are personal reasons. Financial reasons are because typically, again, Silicon Valley startup model, you get equity. That means options or shares of a company. And if a company works, your shares may be 100 times more than any salary you could possibly dream of being a Microsoft vice president for the next 20 years. So there are legends about Google secretaries buying islands, and they are true. There is a data point that before Facebook did the IPO, 2 months, all Lamborghinis in Silicon Valley and the whole of California were reserved. That's true. For 3 months, specifically for Facebook employees who, in anticipation of a big cash coming from IPO, just booked all the Lamborghinis in the area. So yes, high-level people, imagine yourself, you already have like a couple million, whatever, in the bank, and the next salary doesn't change anything. So you're not sensitive, to plus or minus, a couple $100K or $1 million. But that, if you happen to be in Instagram, you could make like $100 million, and that changes your life. So there is a financial incentive. But the stronger is, ability to actually do something. Last week, I met with Irv Henderson, who was VP Mobile for Yahoo. And he's running his own startup for already 2 years, 15 people right now. And his word, quote, "In Yahoo, I couldn't do anything myself, period. So they tell me what to do, and that's it, pretty much. Even though I'm VP, mobile, but pretty much I don't have a choice what I do. And I really want to change the world. So if I join a startup, let it be 15 people, but I know that I can change something myself. So that's a much higher motivation for those people to go. But again, long story short, these are the kind of people that a successful startup should be looking for, even at the range of, say, 10 people at successful fundraising. And if you look carefully at how you typically would talk to those people, attract them, you will find interesting thing. They typically, generally hang around VCs. Because apparently there's no way for a VP Mobile at Yahoo to know what startups are available out there. There's just thousands of them and they have no clue. So what they do, and what VCs generally highly support, and what VCs do is they just hang around each other. So they meet for coffee, they have conversations. Typically, a VC will have a couple dozens of names of people who are professionals in the area. Sometimes they even hire them and pay salary for doing nothing. Yes, there is a practice, and I've seen that a high-level exec at Nokia getting salary at Excel, and they call it entrepreneur in residence. So venture capital would actually pay him monthly money so that he doesn't go anywhere else, just hangs around, helps them, and in case a mobile company comes and does require a high-level mobile professional. So generally, again, VCs are extremely helpful because A, they will introduce you to the people. B, again, for VP Mobile or somebody else, it's not possible to tell whether that startup is likely to work or not. That's not their job. But this is a professional job for a VC. So if I'm like, executive, high-level executive, and I'm looking for joining a startup, well, apparently I will want to join somebody who is, professionally qualified as having the chance to succeed. So if a professional venture capital, again, like Sequoia, Accel, or kind of those guys tells me, hey, these are 10 guys, but we are just about to explode, to me, to the professional, it's a great endorsement, and it increases my, let's say, chances or probability of joining a successful startup highly, like 100 times or so. So I would prefer not to join blindly if you just get a call from somebody out there in the woods, but I would definitely consider it seriously if a venture capital suggests that. Again, if you're curious, just in case you're curious, after closing Series A like a while ago, raising $5 million US, first 4 hires that we did, VP Sales, VP Business Development, VP Product, VP Engineering, all 4 came as a recommendation from Accel. So no exception. I couldn't possibly reach to those kind of people that we're able to reach. And I could not possibly move a sales VP of sales out of Brasilia to convince him to come to live to Lithuania in November with his wife and dog. And Accel did. So this is, again, I'm just illustrating that if you were considering, hiring needs and getting access to those kind of high-level executives, the management team, apparently this is high added value that you get from VCs, in addition to advice, to all of our stuff. So there's a number of things, and in general, like on average, I would say that probably you get as much added value advice as you get in money. In my specific case, again, after Series A, I would say that the experience, the connections, the door opening, etc., was highly more valuable than in money. So that's my specific case, but talking to entrepreneurs, the general feedback you say, well, it's probably about the same. So if you get $1 million in cash, highly likely you will think that you get $1 million in added value. But that's the good news. Now, the bad news is that very often VCs would try to communicate and exaggerate the added value as a way to sell them to you. Because if you think of that, say, suppose you have a hot company, like super hot. So suppose you have 10 VCs that want to talk to you. And VCs know, apparently because it's a profession, that they cannot afford to compete on price, right? Because that's a dead end. If you run an auction, that's a kill for everybody. So for a VC to start auction war against next VC, it's a non-goer. So typically, if they smell the auction, they would just disappear because they say, well, nobody wins in the auction, period. Now, what they do instead is they immediately try to diversify themselves and, hey, money is green everywhere, but I'm experienced in mobile, I know that guy, I know that guy, I can bring you Nokia, I can bring you this, I can bring you that. And typically, they would try to sell you added value so you don't think that they are same as everybody else. Yes, everybody's selling a Ford, but I'm a Toyota. Everybody's doing that, but I'm very different from that, and therefore your focus should be on this, and don't look at the money. Money is the same, so how about you accept the small valuation? Because it's basically the same, but you get my connections, my time, my value, experience, etc., etc. So I have not met a VC who is not exaggerating what they would do. That's a major sales tool for a VC. So just looking realistically, just divide what they say by 3. Still, you get enough value, but apparently get much less when it's promised, but still it's pretty valuable. So definitely answer your question. If you go into that deal, it's extremely helpful. And the last thing is pretty important, which is relevant only in successful case. You might argue that building a company or funding a company or getting people in, etc., it's arguably may or may not be helpful with somebody else. But when it comes to selling the company or IPOing a company, this is where you have 0 experience, and this is the totally opposite. VCs have a ton of experience, ton of connections, ton of channels. They know how to build and run auctions, etc. And typically, this is where you get, immediately on the spot, much higher ROI on your equity, your investment than without them. So a real story. There was a company, I wouldn't mention the name, but it was a mobile ad network, and it was backed by some of the tier 1 venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. So at some moment, they decided that 2 greatest companies, Google and Apple, want to compete for them. That's the best possible auction you could possibly have on the planet. And in the morning, the price started for 300 million. Next day, it was sold for 750 million. And just because the VCs were smart enough how to build auction, how to hire bankers, how to put a term sheet. The funniest thing, because it was subject to Federal Communications Association, FCA approval, there was a chance that it wouldn't approve the deal as being too monopolistic. So the term sheet that VCs were able to get said that one company, Google, committed to buying the company and paying the full 750 million, even if FCA doesn't approve the deal. So this is what you get if you get professional negotiations at your side, and there's just no way you can buy that advice. Just no way. So the very important thing is, if you are successful and you want to make use of that success, this is where I would say simply you have to go with professionals. So these are the spectrum of things where VCs could be helpful to you. Probably we covered those questions, and if you have like 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, maybe one question.
Sure.
What KPIs would you use to describe the maturity and success of Lithuanian startup ecosystem or Lithuanian startup and VC ecosystem? I mean, how can we be better, and what's the future here in Lithuania for startups?
Well, again, there is good news, there is bad news, as always. So the good news, I wouldn't be here, at least I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't believe that this is an awesome community, and there is a lot of things that you could do, and spending my time, my money here is better than spending my time, my money in Silicon Valley. I just wouldn't be here. So I honestly believe it's a great opportunity. Again, I sometimes recently use Finland as an example. It's only twice as large as Lithuania. Apparently, the Supercells and the Rovio stories from Finland, so would be fair to say and safe to say that you're like standard in mobile gaming right now, Finland, like small country out of like Scandinavia. I was visiting Silicon Valley talking to one Finnish ambassador, and he said, hey, there's like 50 Finnish companies in Silicon Valley funded by Silicon Valley VCs, 50. So even relative to Lithuania's size, that means that Lithuania probably should be having next couple of years 25-ish, 20, 30 companies out there. Right now it has a couple at least that I'm aware of. So I believe there is an awesome opportunity here. Now, well, apparently on the other side, there is still a lot of work to do. So I would say that maturity is only beginning to get there, just by looking at, say, the quality of ideas that guys are working with. So I probably will elaborate on the quality and skip everything else just for the sake of time. But again, a typical Lithuanian seems like any idea that comes to my mind immediately translates into a startup. So I think of a mirror app, like next day, let's work on a mirror app startup without checking, looking, etc., etc. Now, very different in Silicon Valley. So sometimes I compare, if you like have at least a school understanding of astrophysics. You know how the planets and solar systems are created. There's a lot of matter which spins and gravitates and consolidates around, stars and planets, etc. So Silicon Valley could be compared to that in terms of ideas. So there's a space like social networking, and there is a like movement, yes, social networking, this or that, or like applications, yes, there should be ad networks, etc. So even before anybody does anything, there is a lot of speculation, discussions, blogging, and otherwise just learning, understanding, writing, etc., talking about various ideas and consolidating them into what's commonly understood most likely to work. So before Facebook was built, well, apparently there was this in the air that social angle is fine. There's the rule of 6 connections. There are classmates, there is this, there is that. So it would be fair to say that Facebook very well executed on that idea. It did not invent the kind of concept. Or search. I mean, if you remember early days of search, there were like Lycosys and Infospaces and Yahoos, etc. Everybody was discussing, should the search be like categories versus keyword, etc., etc. And Google executed very well on that consolidated idea. So for entrepreneur, there are 2 things that are important as a takeout. One, if you spend enough time to learn, what today are the hottest ideas that are, say, supposed to be tested soon, you typically would get a much higher quality idea than anything that potentially can come to your mind, because this is a product of the community versus this is your own unique idea, which may be crazy, random, etc., etc. Of course, there is a chance that you're like great inventor and something came to your mind that nobody out of like 4 billion people in the Western civilized world have ever thought of. It's probable, possible, but most likely not. Most likely the community idea has a more potential just because it's been validated at the theoretical level before anybody does it physically. Now the second thing, even if you have come to an awesome idea which might change the world, etc., if it's not that type of recognized common idea that everybody's talking about, it's highly unlikely you will get investors or partners or anybody else simply because of that. Because equally as entrepreneurs are looking to implement mobile ad network or social game, etc., equally because this idea is being circulated, investors are looking to invent, write their theses and prepare for investing in that area. A lot of vice presidents and Microsofts and others were looking at that idea saying, hey, I'll probably do something in that area. So it consolidates not only entrepreneurs, it consolidates everybody. So that means that if you, sometimes it's like in Silicon Valley, sometimes instead of this pitch, saying, hey, I'm working on mobile ad network. That's it, 3 words. Everybody knows that you are like one of the 100 guys which tries to build that. And that's good, because there is a VC who has considered that, decided whether interesting, not interested. If it's interesting, built a thesis, secured some funding from his partners, etc., gave a permission to invest into that idea, etc. So if you look at Silicon Valley startups, they all execute on very specific, well-commented, well-documented, well-discussed ideas where there's a common understanding there will be a big hit. And totally the opposite. Lithuania is random. I've seen anything from, I don't know, like small restaurants for dogs to next atomic space station, whatever. Like any idea that comes immediately qualify for startup. And already there you can judge on the maturity of the ecosystem. That means startups are just not looking at what is being discussed, what is being talked, and that's dangerous. So it's just a symptom of maturity, but again, the good news is I think it's massively improving. And I do believe in the next 5 years, again, per capita will be probably same successful as the Finnish guy, at least the Estonians. Sure. So probably we're getting closer to the end. So I would like to thank you and thank you guys for your attention. Thank you.